The light above me flickered softly, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to be on. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and plastic, the kind that clung to your nostrils long after you'd left. Machines beeped in rhythm with the slow, steady beat of my heart. At least the part of it they'd managed to fix. I blinked slowly, unsure of what time it was or even what day, but I was awake, alive, barely. "You're back with us, Mr. Whitaker," came a calm voice beside me. A woman leaned over, her face lined but kind. White coat, glasses, clipboard. She wasn't family, that much I could tell. "I'm Dr. Reynolds, your cardiologist. You've just come out of emergency surgery, triple bypass. Your heart stopped for 47 seconds during the procedure, but we brought you back." 47 seconds. I let those words settle into my chest, heavier than the surgical bandages wrapped tight around it. Technically dead, long enough for a goodbye if anyone had cared to say one. Dr. Reynolds checked the monitor beside me, then smiled faintly. "You're going to be okay, but it's going to be a long road back. 2 weeks here minimum, then light recovery at home." Home. The word struck harder than the news of dying, because in that moment I didn't know if anyone there even remembered I existed. 2 days passed. Painkillers dulled the ache in my chest, but not the weight pressing down on me. Nurse Kelly, with her auburn ponytail and gentle hands, helped me sit up, walk a few feet. Each step felt like dragging bricks. "You're strong," she'd say kindly, though we both knew I'd lost 30 pounds of dignity along with body weight. Between visits from the physical therapist and carefully chewed spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, I waited. I checked my phone over and over. Nothing. Not one call, not one message. Not even a thumbs-up emoji in the family chat. 3 weeks ago, the last thing Jason sent was a meme about chicken wings. Linda's last text had been about the grocery store being out of almond milk. But when I told them about the surgery weeks before it happened, neither replied. So I waited. 2 full weeks of waiting in a windowless hospital room with a tray table for company. I told myself maybe they didn't know the exact date. Maybe something got lost in translation. Maybe they'd be here on discharge day. January the 29th. That morning, the sky outside turned a brilliant steel gray, the kind of light you only get in a cold Pennsylvania winter. I'd packed everything into a duffel bag Linda had given me 2 decades ago. My toothbrush, the pajamas that smelled faintly like mothballs, and home. A copy of Louis L'Amour I never got around to reading. I felt stronger. My stitches still pulled with every move, but the deep, crushing ache had faded. Dr. Reynolds smiled as she signed the discharge papers. "You're lucky, Harold. Most men your age don't bounce back like this. Make it count." I nodded. "That's the plan." Before they wheeled me out, I sat quietly on the edge of the bed and opened the family group chat. I typed "hospitals releasing me today. Looking forward to seeing everyone." Too emotional. I deleted it. Typed again, "Doctor says I can go home today. Would love a ride." Too soft. Still too needy. Final version, "Discharges this morning. Anyone able to pick me up?" Simple, direct, neutral. I hit send. Then I waited, watching the screen like a man waiting for news from the front. Jason's reply came in less than 5 minutes. "Call a taxi. I'm watching something." I stared at those words, read them 3 times, 4. I hadn't seen my son in months, had nearly died, and this was his response. A minute later, Linda chimed in. "Just stay there another month. It's so peaceful without you." I didn't drop the phone. I set it down very gently on the scratchy hospital blanket, as if even the device needed comfort now. The beeping machine beside me kept up its rhythm. My breath did not. It caught in my throat like a fishhook. My chest burned, not from surgery, but from something far worse. I'd given them everything. Decades of sacrifice, sleepless nights, 2 jobs, 1 canceled honeymoon, a Harley-Davidson sold for a crib, and years of overtime to pay for Jason's business dreams. And this was the reward. Nurse Kelly stepped in. She paused when she saw my face. "You okay, Mr. Whitaker? Any pain?" I shook my head. She glanced at my phone, still glowing on the bed. Her smile faded. "I'm sorry. Families can be complicated." That was one word for it, the polite, nurse-approved version. The truth was uglier. I'd spent 45 years carrying 2 people who only noticed my presence when they needed something. Now they were happy I'd been gone. I looked down at the discharge forms in my lap. Medication schedule, activity limitations, follow-up appointments. But those weren't instructions anymore. They were something else. They were permission. Permission to finally stop being the one who always showed up. Permission to finally start walking away. Outside, a yellow cab waited at the curb. The driver looked like he'd seen everything wrinkles, a frayed ball cap, a look in his eyes that understood pain. He popped the trunk. "Need help with your bag, sir." I handed it over, careful not to twist my chest. "Tough day?" he asked as I slid into the back seat. "Tough, 45 years. He looked at me in the rearview mirror and nodded. "Ain't that the truth?" We pulled away from the hospital. I didn't look back. Pittsburgh has always been a city built on sacrifice. Steel, smoke, sweat. That was the language of men like me. Men who measured worth in calluses and clocked hours. I didn't grow up with much, but I earned every single thing I had. I was 26 when I gave up the first real thing I ever loved, a cherry red Harley-Davidson I'd saved 2 years to buy. It roared like thunder and made me feel invincible. I used to ride it down winding country roads just to hear the echo bounce off the trees. But babies don't sleep well to the sound of a V-twin engine. "We need the crib," Harold Linda said, bouncing Jason on her hip. "Not some toy you ride on weekends." She wasn't wrong. So I polished that bike one last time, wheeled it to the curb, and stuck a cardboard for sale sign under the handlebars. Sold it for $4,500. Traded freedom for responsibility. I told myself it was temporary just until Jason was older. I believed that lie for decades. By the early 90s, Linda had taken to planning a honeymoon we never had. "We'll do Paris," she said, flipping through glossy travel magazines on our worn-out couch. Springtime, Eiffel Tower, fresh start. We'd been married 15 years by then and never spent a night away from the Tri-County area. I started working double shifts, socking away every spare dollar in a ceramic jar shaped like the Eiffel Tower. We made it to $673 before the phone call came. "Dad, I got in," Jason said breathlessly. "I got accepted to university." Linda cried, clutching the jar like it was made of gold. Paris went back on the shelf. We tore up the brochures and wrote a check to the bursar's office. "Europe will always be there," she said. Turns out some dreams don't wait. The house we bought in Allegheny was modest, 2 bedrooms, a squeaky back door, a patchy lawn I mowed every Saturday. Jason grew up playing catch in that yard while I watched from the front steps, boots' unlaced hands stained with machine grease. By 2003, I was pulling 16-hour days to keep up with bills and tuition. Linda spent her afternoons watching daytime television. Sometimes she'd glance at me from the couch and say, "You worry too much, Harold. Just relax." I remember collapsing into my recliner after a double shift, once sweat still clinging to my back. "When do I get to rest?" I asked her. She didn't look up from her magazine. "When Jason graduates and gets a good job, then we'll have time for us." Jason did graduate. And then he needed help with rent. Then a car loan. Then something bigger. In 2011, he pitched us on his dream, a boutique design firm. He had a logo drawn on a napkin and confidence that could light up the whole county. "This is our ticket," he told me. "Just help me get started. I'll pay it back with interest in 6 months." He needed $55,000. I didn't have it. But I had equity in the house, so I put it up as collateral and signed the paperwork with shaking hands. The business folded in 4 months. Jason said the market wasn't ready for his vision. I worked 3 more years just to cover the debt. Linda never blamed him. "He tried," she'd say. "You can't crush his spirit." But no one ever asked how mine was doing. I kept every receipt from those years, car repairs, bank transfers, overdraft notices. Not because I needed proof, but because part of me hoped someday someone would ask, "How much did you give up, Dad?" I'd just hand them the folder. I gave up vacations, hobbies, friends, that Harley, that honeymoon, my health. All for a family that only noticed what I gave, not what I lost. Jason turned 30 in 2017 and still lived in our basement. He installed an elaborate gaming setup in the living room, his laughter echoing through the walls while I adjusted my blood pressure meds. Linda hosted her book club upstairs every Tuesday, pouring wine into expensive glasses while I read used paperbacks in the garage. I never said anything. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But gratitude goes both ways. And silence doesn't mean peace. The older I got, the more I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible unless there was a bill to pay, an appliance to fix, or a crisis to clean up. Linda would introduce me at her charity events with a chuckle. "This is Harold. He's the reason I can do all this." They'd laugh. I'd smile. And I'd go home alone in a room full of people. Still, I held out hope that maybe someday they'd say thank you. That one night, Jason would look up from his screen and say, "You did a lot for me, Dad." But gratitude doesn't grow in entitlement, and love isn't always returned just because you give it freely. By the end of 2022, my body had started sending louder warnings. Tightness in my chest when climbing stairs, a strange metallic taste in my mouth during dinner, dizzy spells while tying my shoes. I mentioned it once to Jason. "Maybe take some vitamins," he said, not looking up from his controller. I tried to laugh, tried to believe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But it was the same shrug I'd gotten for years when I said I was tired, when I asked for help, when I said I needed a little space to breathe. I didn't need vitamins. I needed a family who cared if I lived or died. In early spring of 2023, I collapsed while raking leaves in our backyard. One minute I was clearing the last of the winter debris from the azaleas. The next, the world-tilted colors smeared together and my knees buckled. When I came to, I was strapped to a gurney, an oxygen mask over my mouth, and the sky above me cracked in half by the blue swirl of ambulance lights. I remember one paramedic whispering, "You're lucky your neighbor saw you go down." Lucky. That's one word for it. Dr. Myers called it a mild cardiac event. He scribbled terms like hypertension, vascular stress, and long-term overexertion on a clipboard, and spoke in the same tone one might use to comment on weather patterns. "You've been ignoring this for years, haven't you?" he said without looking up. I didn't answer, because he was right. I had ignored it. Not out of pride, but out of necessity. Someone had to keep the lights on. Someone had to hold this family together with duct tape and habit. But heart attacks don't care about obligation. The hospital room smelled like lemon disinfectant and cold metal. I watched condensation drip slowly down the window pane, counting the seconds between each drop. That was easier than watching the door, hoping someone would walk through. Linda finally arrived the next morning. She wore her favorite maroon shawl, the one with gold threading she saved for brunches and book clubs, not a trace of worry in her face. "You gave us a scare," she said, sitting in the chair but not leaning in. "Us." Jason wasn't with her. I asked where he was. She shrugged. He had a late-night raid with his friends online. Said he'll come tomorrow. My heart monitor beeped louder as if objecting for me. Jason did show up 30 hours later. He walked in with a smoothie in one hand, Bluetooth earpiece in the other. No flowers, no card, no apology. "Yo, you good?" he said halfway through a yawn. I stared at him. "I had a heart attack, Jason." He blinked. "Yeah, but you're not dying, right?" He said it like a joke, like the whole thing was an inconvenience, like my mortality was a glitch in his schedule. Then he turned to his mother. "Hey, did you ever book that Airbnb for Comic-Con?" I don't remember what happened next, only that I suddenly felt very cold. Not from the IV, from the silence. From the understanding that this moment was the final nail in something I hadn't realized was already buried. The doctor discharged me 2 days later with a folder full of instructions and a list of prescriptions that cost more than our monthly groceries. When we got home, Linda went back to her puzzles and Jason resumed his marathon gaming sessions. No one asked what the doctor had said. No one offered to help sort my pills. On the second night, I asked Jason to take out the trash. It was overflowing. He waved me off. "In a sec." 3 hours later, it was still there. So I dragged the heavy bag to the curb myself, one slow step at a time, careful not to let the weight pull too hard against my chest. That night I sat at the kitchen table staring at the worn wood grain and asked myself a question I'd never dared to ask out loud. What if I just left? The thought lingered. It followed me from room to room, when I showered, when I shuffled my pills into labeled boxes, when I reheated last week's meatloaf and listened to the faint laughter echoing from the basement. It didn't sound like family. It sounded like spectators. I wasn't a father anymore. I was an afterthought with a wallet and a weak heart. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the city clerk's office, routine paperwork about property taxes. But what caught my eye wasn't the contents. It was the name on the envelope, Jason Holloway, listed as co-owner. I stood in the living room holding that envelope like it had fangs. I had never added Jason to the deed. I confronted Linda. She looked away. "We thought it'd be easier, just in case something happened," she said. "It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. Without telling me, they'd gone to a notary months ago. While I was working, they had filed a request to add Jason's name to the property. They hadn't forged anything. They hadn't needed to. Linda still had my durable power of attorney, something I'd signed years ago when she was going in for knee surgery, never thinking it would be used against me. That night I didn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the betrayal tighten around my chest more than the heart attack ever did. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were preparing for it. Not with grief, but with paperwork. And that's when the shift happened, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I had lived my entire life under the illusion that love required suffering. That sacrifice would be rewarded. That family meant protection. But I wasn't protecting anyone anymore. I was enabling their apathy. And I was done. Fall crept in quietly that year. The maple tree outside my bedroom window turned a muted gold, and the chill in the air came earlier than usual. I started sleeping with an extra blanket. Not for warmth, just for weight, something to remind me I still existed beneath it. I had made up my mind weeks ago, but I moved carefully, quietly. I'd spent a lifetime providing. Now I was planning my exit with the same discipline I once reserved for overtime hours and mortgage payments. No one noticed. Jason was still glued to his monitors. Linda had her calendar filled with charity meetings and book club potlucks. They didn't ask where I went during the day, so I began leaving the house. I started with the basics. I visited the county records office downtown and requested a certified copy of the property title. The woman behind the desk glanced at the request, then handed me a printed form without a word. When I got the paperwork back, I stared at it for a long time. Jason's name was right there. Second line, equal ownership. It was legal. My house was no longer mine. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I called a man named Charles Benton, a semi-retired attorney I'd met during a neighborhood fundraiser 3 years prior. We'd bonded over a shared taste in old jazz and mutual disdain for Pittsburgh parking meters. He picked up on the second ring. "Harold Whitaker," I said. "I need to talk. Not tomorrow. Today." Charles met me that afternoon in a small, unmarked office on Liberty Avenue. No receptionist, no secretary, just 2 chairs, a chipped table, and a coffee maker that looked older than me. "You look like hell," he said, pulling a legal pad from his drawer. "Good," I replied. "That's how I feel." Saturday, I explained everything slowly, clearly. The power of attorney, the quiet transfer of ownership, the hospital stay, the conversations, or lack thereof. Charles didn't interrupt. He just nodded and wrote. The pen never stopped moving. When I was done, he asked one question. "What do you want?" I answered without hesitation. "I want to take back what's mine, and I want to make sure they don't see a cent after I'm gone." Charles leaned back, hands folded. "Well, you've got options. Limited ones, but clean ones. And if we start now, we can make it all legal before they know what hit them." He explained what I needed to do. Revoke the existing power of attorney. Create a new will, one that overrides anything previous. Transfer my half of the house into a living trust, one that excludes both Jason and Linda. Appoint a charity as the sole beneficiary of any retirement accounts or savings. "And I'd suggest you write a letter," Charles added, "not because you have to, but because someday someone's going to ask why." The next morning, I revoked Linda's power of attorney. It took less than 10 minutes. A notary stamped the form, and just like that, the pen I'd given her to sign on my behalf years ago was legally useless. It felt anticlimactic, like slamming a door and realizing it had been unlocked the whole time. Over the next few weeks, Charles and I met twice a week. He drew up the trust paperwork, crafted a new will, and walked me through every account I had down to the small savings I kept for emergencies. I transferred everything. By mid-November, it was done. My assets were locked in a charitable trust under my name designated for the National Cardiac Recovery Trust, an organization that funded surgeries for low-income patients. I figured since my own heart had been broken in more ways than one, I might as well help repair someone else's, I told Charles. He just nodded. Linda never asked why I had become so active all of a sudden. She assumed I was going through some sort of late-life crisis and commented once that it was nice to see me getting out of the house. Jason didn't even register the shift. I started cooking my own meals, doing my own laundry, spending hours in the garage reading manuals I had long forgotten I owned. No one noticed the distance, so I didn't bother to explain it. One afternoon, Charles handed me a thick folder with a yellow sticky note on top that simply read, "Final draft, sign plus store safely." I signed it. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove out to the countryside, Just me, the open road, and my old pickup humming beneath me like a promise. I parked at the edge of a wooded trail Jason used to love as a kid. I walked it alone. The leaves crunched beneath my feet, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt lighter. Like I wasn't being watched. Or used. Or ignored. Just me. Back at home, I slid the signed documents into a locked drawer in my workbench and placed a post-it on the inside lid to be opened in the event of my death. Charles Benton has copies. It felt dramatic, but also necessary. Linda might open it one day, or Jason. And when they did, they'd learn the truth. Not in a fight, not in a screaming match, but on paper, in signatures, in notarized pages that could not be erased. By the time the first snow fell, I had everything I needed. Not revenge. Not justice. Just control. Quiet, legal, and absolute. It had been 3 months since I finalized everything with Charles. 3 quiet months. And not the kind of quiet that echoes through an empty house, but a deliberate quiet. A quiet that came from choice, not neglect. I started waking up earlier, making my own breakfast, reading the paper cover to cover. Sometimes I sat in the shed out back fixing old tools just for the feel of steel in my hands. There was a strange kind of freedom in it all. Linda and Jason still lived under the same roof. But the dynamics had changed. They didn't know it yet, but I did. I no longer played the role of the absent-minded old man in the corner of the room. I wasn't the walking wallet, the fading father, the man to be ignored. I had become something different. Something untouchable. Linda once mentioned a cruise she was planning with Jason, of course. Some mother-son bonding time, she said with a tight smile. I nodded, kept chewing, and offered nothing in return. I already knew they had transferred money from the joint account for it, assuming I wouldn't notice. They were half right. I noticed. I just didn't care anymore. Because the account wasn't going to be theirs much longer. By February, the Pittsburgh winter had settled in like an old bitter friend. I liked it that way. I went for walks alone, heavy coat, gloved hands in my pockets, scarf wrapped high. I passed other old men at the park, some with dogs, some with books. We nodded, nothing more. There was an understanding between us. Not everything needed to be said. One evening I pulled out a small notebook I hadn't touched in years. Inside were little lists. I used to make things I wanted to do, places I wanted to see, books I'd never read. Most were scratched out. Not because I'd done them, but because life had made me forget they mattered. Now I reopened those pages like an old promise. I started reading again. I even picked up a camera, an old Nikon I'd stashed in the closet long ago, and began taking photos of simple things, rust on the shed door, steam rising from coffee, the way the sun hit the fence at 4:00 p.m. No one asked what I was doing. And for the first time, that felt like a gift. Around mid-March, Linda walked into the living room and said casually, Jason's thinking about moving back in permanently. He might even bring his girlfriend around sometime. She smiled. I didn't. I stood up, turned the TV off, and looked her dead in the eye. Jason doesn't own this house. Her face twitched barely. Of course he does. His name's... No, I cut in. Not anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer proof. I just left the room. She never brought it up again. That night I emailed Charles. She's beginning to notice. He replied in under 10 minutes. Let her. Everything is sealed. Just stay quiet. So I did. The garden bloomed that spring without anyone asking me to till the soil. I did it anyway, like I always had. But now I planted for myself. Tomatoes, bell peppers, rosemary. Jason hated vegetables. Linda never cooked. Didn't matter. I filled the earth with things I could grow and enjoy, not things others expected. A few neighbors noticed I was around more. I thought you were sick, one of them said. We hadn't seen you all winter. No, I smiled. Just rebuilding. One Saturday morning I saw Jason pacing on the phone in the backyard. His voice was louder than usual. But I thought it was still in my name. I don't understand, can't you check again? I sipped my coffee from the porch, hidden by the screen door. He hung up and stormed back inside. I didn't ask questions. I just watered the rosemary. It was starting. The unraveling. They would learn slowly that the foundation they stood on wasn't as secure as they thought. But I had no plans to confront them. No big speeches. No fights. Let the papers do the talking. Let the silence do the damage. That afternoon, I pulled out a letter I had written weeks ago. It was addressed to Linda and Jason. Unopened, unsigned, unfinished. I read it again. You once asked me why I was quiet, why I didn't push back. The truth is, silence was the only tool I had left that you couldn't twist, so I used it. Not to harm you, just to free myself. I folded the letter, tucked it into the back of the folder Charles had given me. Maybe one day they'd find it. Maybe not. Either way, I had said what I needed. I wasn't waiting for the fall. I wasn't tracking every crack in the wall. I had reclaimed something more valuable than the house or the money. I had reclaimed myself. It started with a raised voice in the kitchen. Jason. He had found the updated deed. Well, not the paper itself, I had locked those away months ago, but a notice from the county that triggered his panic. He didn't even try to hide his tone. Did you know about this? He barked at Linda. It says, Dad took my name off the property last year. She stammered something about legal mistakes. I stayed in my chair, kept peeling an apple. By then, both of them had begun noticing other changes. The retirement account no longer accepted transfers from Jason. The foundation's name, National Cardiac Recovery Trust, started appearing in unexpected places. A tax document here, a bank form there. I had made sure Charles moved swiftly but quietly. Everything we did was legal, signed, sealed, notarized. The house, the savings, the future restructured. They cornered me one evening. Jason had printouts. Linda held her arms tight across her chest like a child waiting to be scolded. Is this true? Jason snapped. Did you really change everything? I looked at him. Then at Linda. Then back down at the apple in my hand. I did what needed doing. You just cut us off, Linda asked. No, I said simply. I just stopped pretending you hadn't already left me behind. Linda turned red. Jason stormed out. I stood in that silence for a long time after. My hand was steady. My heart calm. The choice had been made long ago. 2 weeks later, Linda received a formal letter from Charles's office, not about the house that was done, but about the medical directive and power of attorney. They were no longer hers. There would be no hospital visits, no surprise consents, no manipulative guilt. All decisions, if needed, would now go through the foundation. Charles and Angela Price would be responsible. Professionals. Impartial. Unshakable. She didn't speak to me for a week. Then one morning I found the Paris guidebook from years ago sitting open on the kitchen table. No note. Just the page with the Eiffel Tower dog-eared. I turned the page once, then closed it. Put it gently back on the shelf. Jason tried one more power play. He marched into the living room and announced I talked to an attorney. You can't just give it all away, you know. Then Zumi replied. He blinked. What? You heard me. Take me to court. Make your case. Put it all on record. I stood up, walked past him, and added without looking. But remember, discovery works both ways. He never filed. That summer, I started volunteering at a local community garden. They didn't care who I used to be. They only cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I pulled weeds and turned compost without complaining. There was a young vet there, early 30s, lost a leg in Iraq. We didn't talk much, but he always nodded when I walked up. One day I asked him why he came every week. He shrugged. Saves me from myself. I understood. More than he knew. Linda and Jason began treating the house like it was rented. Less eye contact. Fewer questions. More avoidance. They no longer asked about the bills, or my health, or even dinner. Jason stayed out more. Linda started sleeping in the guest room. It was a house of bodies, not a home. But I had expected that. And prepared for it. The real twist came quietly, like most things in my life now. Angela called. Mr. Whitaker, she said. Channel 11 reached out. They heard about the donation. They want to do a human interest piece. Not live, just a sit down. We don't have to accept. I paused. Will they name the family? No, she said. They just want to tell your side. The story of why an everyday man gave away everything. I smiled. Then let's talk. A week later, I sat in a clean little studio in downtown Pittsburgh. 2 lights. 1 camera. And a gentle voice across from me. Mr. Whitaker, the interviewer, said some people build wealth to pass on to their children. But you've chosen a different path. Why? I looked straight into the camera. My son once told me to call a taxi after my surgery. My wife said I should stay at the hospital longer so I wouldn't be a burden. I paused, took a breath, and that's when I realized I already didn't have a family, so I gave to people who might care that I'm still alive. Angela sat off camera, her eyes glassy. The crew went quiet. No follow-up needed. The segment aired a few days later. 6 minutes long. Aired after the weather. But people noticed. Neighbors. Old co-workers. Even my barber. Linda didn't say a word. Jason slammed the door when he left the next morning. That was fine. By then I had finally stopped listening for their footsteps. It was a strange thing to be recognized at the grocery store. Not by name. Just by story. "You're the man from Channel 11, right?" a cashier asked one afternoon. I nodded. She smiled. "My dad, he went through something similar. I just wanted to say thank you for speaking out." I thanked her quietly. Went home with a lighter bag and a heavier heart. I hadn't expected the segment to make waves. But it did. Quiet waves. The kind that lap at the edges of people's lives when they're not looking. The kind that say, "You're not alone." 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a short note from a woman in her 70s. She wrote about her late husband. How he'd been sidelined by his own children. How they'd sold his car while he was in rehab. How they'd fought over what hospital would cost them less. "I never thought anyone would say it out loud," she wrote. "Thank you for giving us a voice." Angela called again. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. The foundation's donor base increased by 22% in the last month. Most cite your interview." I laughed softly. All I did was speak the truth. She replied, "Sometimes that's the rarest kind of donation." Jason never mentioned the segment. But I noticed he started keeping his bedroom door shut all the time. No more loud calls with friends. No more hints at future plans. Just silence. And bills. He began leaving receipts on the kitchen counter, half-paid credit cards, deferred loan notices, all addressed to him. I didn't touch them. I wasn't in the rescue business anymore. Linda tried a different route. She started cooking again. Pots clanged. Meatloaf returned. But she never asked me to join her. Just left plates on the table without a word. Sometimes I ate them. Sometimes I didn't. Fall came early that year. The air crisped. Leaves burned red and orange and gold along the Allegheny Hills. I started going to the garden center more often. Not to buy, just to sit near things that still had the courage to grow. One afternoon, a teenage boy sat next to me on the bench. Didn't say a word for 10 minutes. Then blurted, "I saw your video." I turned to him. "Yeah. My mom plays it when she thinks I'm not listening. Says you remind her of Grandpa." I nodded. That was enough. In late October, Angela sent a photo. A new patient wing at a rehab facility had just been completed, partially funded by the foundation. A bronze plaque at the entrance read, "Dedicated in honor of everyday courage." No name. Just that. It was better that way. I pinned the photo on the fridge. Didn't say a word to Linda. But I noticed her staring at it one morning. She stood there for a full minute, coffee in hand, reading that line over and over. "Everyday courage," she murmured, then turned and walked out. Jason finally snapped around Thanksgiving. He barged into the living room while I was watching football. "Look, I get it all right," he spat. "You're mad. We screwed up. But what do you want from me now, groveling an apology on TV?" I muted the screen. "I want nothing from you, Jason." He flinched. "I've spent too long tying my worth to people who only show up when they smell gain." He looked away. "This isn't fair." "No," I agreed. "It's not." And for once, that ended the conversation. I went back to the community garden that weekend. The veteran was still there. We worked in silence for a while. Then he asked, "So, was it worth it?" I looked around. At the frostbitten cabbages, at the cracked earth we still watered, at the people who had nothing to offer but time and gave it anyway. "It is now," I said. Angela scheduled a follow-up interview for January. A. Written Q. A. No cámaras. Just words. I said yes. Because somewhere someone else might be sitting in a hospital bed wondering why no one is coming to pick them up. They deserve to know they're not forgotten. By December, Linda had stopped leaving dinner. She started eating out more. Once I passed her in the driveway, she had her coat on makeup done. I simply nodded. She didn't look back. The silence was a strange kind of freedom. It didn't fill the house, but it stopped haunting it. I kept the radio on, tended to a small herb pot in the kitchen, watched the news with no one asking to change the channel. Jason moved out the following spring. No announcement. Just an empty room and the faint smell of body spray. He didn't take the receipts. I threw them away. Every last one. By the time I turned 70, silence had become my closest companion. It wasn't lonely. Not anymore. Just honest. The kind of quiet that settles in after a storm has cleared. On my birthday in March, a letter came from the foundation. Not a form letter. A personal note signed by Angela. Dear Harold, you'll be pleased to know that the Cardiac Trust just funded its 5th outpatient transport program in your region. Because of your story, over 100 patients have received home rides dignity intact. You gave more than money. You gave momentum. Happy birthday and thank you. Taped to the letter was a photo. A white van with a blue heart on the side. A nurse helping a man not much younger than me into the front seat. No stretcher, no ambulance, just a human being going home. I sat with that letter in the kitchen. Coffee gone cold beside me. And I smiled. 2 weeks later, Charles Benton called to confirm the final updates to my estate plan. The trust split is finalized, he said. National Cardiac Recovery Trust holds controlling interest in the remainder account. He paused. Would you like to leave a letter for your family, or just let the documentation speak? I took a moment. No letter, I replied. Just the facts. Spring arrived with little fanfare. The Allegheny winds lost their bite. The community garden reopened. I returned not out of habit but choice. A boy from the neighborhood approached one morning. 12, maybe 13. He had a notebook in one hand and a phone in the other. Are you Mr. Whitaker? He asked. I nodded. My teacher showed us your interview in class. That caught me off guard. She said you showed what quiet strength looks like. You blinked. He smiled, shoved the notebook into my hand. It's for our ethics project. We each wrote about someone who made a difference. The page had a title, A Voice in the Silence, and beneath it a simple drawing of a heart-shaped van. I still keep it on my bookshelf. Linda never came back with answers. She moved in with a cousin 2 towns over. No legal battles. No screaming. Just an invisible line drawn and quietly held. She still has her half of the house, but she no longer tries to reclaim its heir. Jason reached out once in May. A text. Just wanted to say, I'm doing better. I get it now. I stared at the message. Typed a simple response. Good. Keep going. That was it. No second act. No father-son reconciliation montage. Just space. And boundaries. Angela invited me to a donor luncheon in June. I almost didn't go. But the idea of meeting some of the drivers and nurses who made those transport programs work, that pulled me in. The event was small, tasteful. No grand speeches. No cámaras. Just conversations. I met a woman named Sharon who drove 4 counties to bring patients home every weekend. She said most folks don't even remember my name, but they always remember the feeling of sitting in a front seat again. I shook her hand and told her that was more than enough. At one point, Angela pulled me aside. There's talk of starting a new pilot dignity-based discharge protocol. Hospital admins are finally listening. She paused. I thought you'd want to know you sparked more than donations. I nodded. Then I can stop worrying. She smiled. You already have. That night I sat outside on the back porch. No noise from Jason's old room. No clanging pots from Linda's half-hearted dinners. Just me. And the wind. And the faint scent of mulch from the garden beds below. I thought back to the man in the hospital bed a year and a half ago. Alone, unsure, discarded. And I realized I hadn't just made it home. I'd made something from home. Something that moved forward even as I stood still. There's a kind of justice that doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't scream. Doesn't throw punches. It just rewrites the ending. Not with revenge, but with resolve. The neighbors know me now. Not because I raised my voice, but because I used it once clearly. That was enough. And every now and then, when I'm out buying seeds or fertilizer or just walking down the street, someone will nod at me, not like they're greeting a hero, but like they're recognizing something they carry too. A story that could have been theirs, or already was. And that's the distance that healed me. Not the miles between people, but the space I gave myself to finally breathe. I never imagined that silence could become my strongest ally. In a world that glorifies loud exits and dramatic revenge, I found something quieter and far more lasting. I found clarity. I found peace. And I found the ability to let go without losing myself. My story isn't a headline anymore. It's not the viral interview or the will that surprised people. It's the life I built when I stopped waiting for others to change. It's in the letters from a foundation that outlived my resentment. It's in the garden that blooms whether my son visits or not. It's in the choices I make each morning without bitterness. I didn't fix my family. I didn't burn bridges either. I simply moved forward and stopped building houses on sand. Maybe you've been there, left alone, taken for granted, expected to keep giving until there's nothing left. If that's you, I see you. And I promise distance isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's preservation. Your story might not look like mine, but maybe you'll recognize the moment when you stop explaining your worth and start living it. When that day comes, don't wait for permission. Pack your things, sign your piece, plant something that doesn't need applause to grow. I'm Harold Whitaker, and this was the quietest decision I ever made, but it saved me loud and clear.